Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I'm Ghadi Francis and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates from the world's most volatile region. A lot has changed since our last episode went on air. The Taliban have taken over Afghanistan. Scenes of fear and chaos have erupted across the country as thousands made a desperate attempt to flee Kabul. But why are we speaking about the graveyard of empires? It is because West Asia will be the first to bear the brunt of a Taliban rule. And what it has really affected is America's credibility in the region. Calls for the US to get out of West Asia are growing louder, and people are asking if they can still be a stable ally anymore.
They call it the graveyard of empires. Superpowers come here looking for glory, but leave defeated and distraught, hastily withdrawing in the middle of the night. In the 19th century, it began with the British. Then the Soviets got a taste of that great game. Decades later, America has been reminded of the same reality, as the Afghan government and forces fell like a house of cards. Most military retreats are not without problems, but in Afghanistan, the sprint to leave spelled catastrophe. When the United States forces entered the country 20 years ago, they were cheered by the people of Afghanistan. They were said to have ushered in a new era in the country.
The Taliban regime is coming to an end.
2 decades of progress that could soon be wiped out. In 2020, the US bypassed the Afghan government. They signed a deal with the devil. It was called an agreement to bring peace to Afghanistan. Just like Vietnam, it was simply an exit deal for them, with the appetite for war waning and funding falling short. In West Asia, US allies are watching the withdrawal with unease. A debacle that reminds many of Vietnam. But as they watch the scenes unfold in Kabul, many are questioning America's reliability as a partner.
It's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide on what government they want, not us to impose the government on them.
Trust in the United States has long been running low. It began when the Trump administration took over. He first ordered the withdrawal of forces from Syria, but then soon backtracked. Although the United States' footprint here is much smaller, the Kurdish forces right now probably have cold feet. For US allies in Lebanon and Iraq, apprehensions are running high. As for the Taliban, its return to power raises questions. It is seeking to improve its image at home and overseas, and its success is a vindication for many across West Asia. In Gaza, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh called Taliban leader Baradar, congratulating him on the takeover of the country. This adds fuel to the racing debate on if Hamas should be a part of the elections, or if they should just keep ruling the Strip as they have been. In Lebanon, the Hezbollah seems to be taking some notes. The country is already reeling from a political vacuum. And if they hold on long enough, they could have a government that is accepted internationally and serves its interests. For the Houthis in Yemen, it is another sign of encouragement. There are also fears about the re-emergence of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The only talk of the town for now is America's deal with the devil. They believe that the United States will cut a deal with the enemy if its interests are served. But the most interested party in this collapse is Tehran. Iran's relationship with the Taliban has been multidimensional. It has been fraught at times, cooperative occasionally, while Shia Iran and the Sunni Taliban are not natural partners. What Iran really cares about is the United States' diminished position here. But not just Iran, even the Gulf states are watching closely. Qatar has provided a diplomatic haven for the Taliban during peace talks with the now vanquished Ghani government, the very peace initiative that paved Taliban's rise to power. As for Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has had long ties with the Taliban, but it is not in their interest to see an undermined US. For US allies like Jordan and Egypt, this is just bad news. Both of them have their own versions of the Taliban lurking in the shadows. The United States is now looking at a new frontier, the Indo-Pacific. West Asia is no longer its most pressing concern, so the withdrawal raises questions for the whole region. Soon the United States is likely to pull back from West Asia, focusing only on its most important commitments. This will give rise to geopolitical battles here, as countries tussle over who will fill the vacuum. As for now, all we know is that this is a policy blunder for the United States. Its reputation as a reliable ally has been shattered. How it affects its position in West Asia is something we will have to wait and watch. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Like always, we'll continue to bring you all the latest updates from the heart of the conflict. Don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up for today. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
Iran's COVID-19 death toll crosses 100,000 as the Delta variant spread through West Asia's worst-hit country. Since Monday, Iran has imposed nationwide restrictions to stem a fifth wave, including travel curbs and closing businesses. President Joe Biden will host Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett for a meeting at the White House on August 26th. The two leaders are expected to discuss critical issues related to regional and global security, including Iran. Israel has removed decades-old restrictions on gay men seeking to donate blood. Its LGBTQ community has lauded the decision as a historic one for the country. According to the UN atomic watchdog, Iran has accelerated its enrichment of uranium to near weapons grade, a move that will raise tensions with the West as both sides seek to resume talks on reviving the nuclear deal.
As Lebanon reels from a devastating fuel crisis, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has promised fuel. Several ships of fuel and diesel arriving from Iran to the Lebanese shores. This comes as the worsening crisis spurred violence across the nation. We bring you this report on Lebanon's growing crises from Ground Zero. Lebanon is running out of fuel. Houses are plunging into darkness. Businesses and hospitals are shutting down. And living conditions are worse than during the civil war. As the fuel that powers Lebanon disappears, Lebanese are sweltering at homes in the summer heat. There is no light and air conditioning, and many are busy tossing out the contents of their fridge.
During the civil war, even with how horrible it was, there weren't any power cuts. There was water and there were jobs. What we are witnessing now is harsher than during the Lebanese civil war. The fridge was on in the morning. Electricity comes for like 2 hours, and our neighbor who has a generator is helping us to keep the fridge cold.
This marks a new low in Lebanon's financial crisis, the result of decades of corruption and mismanagement. Lebanon's ruling elite is still sparring among each other as half of the population sinks into poverty. I traveled to the streets of Beirut to see what the situation was like. What I witnessed was long lines at gas stations and a growing frustration among the Lebanese citizens. The Lebanese Central Bank claims it had to remove the fuel subsidies. The already scarce fuel hit an all-time high price. Distributors, cartels, and some of the owners of gas stations had already stocked up the fuel at subsidized prices without distributing it fairly to the people. In the middle of the chaos, the Lebanese army had to step in, starting a national campaign all over Lebanon, entering closed stations, confiscating stocked fuel, and distributing it to the people, and sometimes for free. In the latest policy failure, the government is sparring with the central bank. It is asking them to not end fuel subsidies. While the standoff continues, Lebanon faces a huge shortage of fuel as generators across the country fall silent.
If we remain on this path, then the next step will be closing down all the restaurants. Because if now private generators are turned off for 3 to 4 hours a day, then later on they will increase the hours of electricity cuts, which will force all the restaurants to shut down.
At least 28 people were killed in Lebanon when a fuel tanker exploded in the north. Over 79 were injured in the blast. Lebanon's latest tragedy amid a series of crises. For now, the country remains in free fall. It is on the verge of national bankruptcy. Medicines and fuel is running out, and so is the patience of the country's citizens.
When the house lights are on, you feel like you have a good day, like the glowing light. I feel my home is dark, and it gives you depression.
Crushed under a mountain of debt, decades of corruption and scandals, the demand for a new government, and a financial meltdown like no other, Lebanon is facing its worst crisis since the civil war, and there seems to be no end in sight. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is One. From wildfires in Jerusalem to floods in Turkey, West Asia is dealing with freak weather events every day. But what led to these? And how can countries cope up with climate change? We tell you more.
It is code red for humanity. Climate change is ringing alarm bells for the entire world. But here in West Asia, freak weather is the new normal. Here's what Turkey has been fighting in the last few months. First, there was a mucilage on the shores of Turkey. Then came devastating wildfires. And now, floods are wreaking havoc here. Over 75 people have died from the floods, the second natural disaster to strike Turkey in a month. Videos from across the region showed widespread damage as emergency workers continued with rescue operations. Families of those missing watched anxiously, fearing the death toll could rise further.
We looked and saw the flood waters coming our way from the direction of the post office. We fled uphill, running past the bridge to bring ourselves to safety. In fact, we had a funeral. My uncle passed away. We were going to the funeral ceremony. We couldn't go there at that moment. They took the coffin inside.
This is unprecedented. There is no power. The mobile phones were dead. There was no reception. You couldn't receive news from anyone. It got dark at 8 p.m. You could only hear the water flowing.
The floods brought chaos to Turkey's northern provinces. Just as the authorities declared that, the wildfires raging through the south were under control. The hills near the sea resort of Marmaris were decked in thick green pine forest. Now, these same hills form a ghostly grey-brown landscape, topped with blackened tree stumps, as though sketched in charcoal. The fire ravaged tens of thousands of hectares of forest in Turkey's Mediterranean and Asian provinces, killing 8 people and forcing thousands of tourists to flee. In Jerusalem, the situation was no different. Wildfires in wooded hills near Jerusalem were contained after crews waged a 3-day battle against the blaze, joined by Palestinian firefighters and the Israeli Air Force.
I think that the situation is under control. All the night we covered all the area and tried to fight with the small fires that we have in all the region. This is the main situation that we have here. To my humble opinion, I think that the firefighters are doing a great job in fighting with the fire all over Jerusalem.
Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett even flew over the mountains, taking a stock of the escalating situation. The wildfire, which started off in the west of Jerusalem, has destroyed at least 2,500 hectares in over 2 days. West Asia is no stranger to conflicts, but if there is any that has no regard for borders or politics, it is climate change. The region is tackling freak weather every day, and hitting a snooze button on climate catastrophe is getting more and more difficult with each day. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Visiting a grave in a cemetery. It can be frightening for some, a moment of sorrow for others. But what if I told you the grave you are visiting is your very own? Bizarre. We agree. But for this Iraqi prisoner in Kirkuk, he visits his grave often. We tell you more about his story.
In this vast graveyard in Iraq's Kirkuk, crowded tombstones seem to stretch for miles. It has the familiar, eerie beauty often found in cemeteries. Visiting a grave here is Ziad Kader Zorab. Ziad is a regular at this graveyard. He is often seen standing by a tombstone, looking at it somberly for hours. Ironically, the grave he visits is his own.
When I returned from Iran in Iran as part of the exchange of prisoners, my family told me that Iraqi authorities brought in a body of you. I said, how is that possible? They said, well, you can go and see it if you want. So one of my relatives accompanied me and showed me this grave. It still carries my name until now, but it wasn't a complete body.
He was only 20 years old when he was captured. Ziad had been a soldier fighting in the Iran-Iraq war. He was taken by the Iranian forces in July 1982. But when he was originally captured, Ziad's family was told that he was killed. They were given a body that they were told was his.
The time passed on his arrival. Oh God, I said to myself, all of his friends have returned except him. Then they brought us the news that he was martyred. So we started a long search for his body and we held a funeral.
Ziad's family buried the body in the main cemetery of Kirkuk. His family held 3 funerals for him until they were eventually told by Iraqi authorities to stop. Only 2 years later, Ziad managed to send a letter to his family during a Red Cross visit to a jail for war prisoners in Iran. His family was astonished by this. It was like Ziad was reborn for them. Gradually, his letters started to arrive every month. Ziad and his family kept exchanging letters until the end of war on the 8th of August 1988. In 1990, Ziad Kader eventually returned home. He was part of a prisoner exchange between Iraq and Iran. At first, Ziad did not believe there was a grave, but now he visits it often. A grave that, till date, bears his name. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Muslims across West Asia have marked the day of Ashura. It is the 10th day of the holy month of Muharram. It is West Asia's second Ashura under the pandemic, as cases surge in various countries across the region. We take a look.
This year the run was special because temperatures were high, so we remembered the heat of the battle, the heat of the sun that Imam Hussein felt.
The Imam Hussein Shrine has provided what visitors require, such as sterilization and face masks. In addition, there are mobile teams in the surrounding areas of both shrines, dusting the place to help reduce risk. From there on, it's the visitors' individual responsibility to protect themselves and others by following preventive measures.
In my opinion, the most important message was not to accept oppression, selflessness, and firmly being based upon the religion of the Prophet.
Thank God we are still continuing the revolution of Imam Hussein, the revolution of resistance, the revolution of pride against the rising prices, greed and diseases.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay home and stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, and you're watching WION World is One.